Had that location. We just want to try to squeeze 800 cars in that park.
Are you a council where you are, or you're white?
Everybody's gonna need to speak directly into the microphone, because otherwise we keep on YouTube and it's just all right.
Speaker off.
Is it on? Hello? Hello, hello?
Okay. Yeah.
Like a good smoothing time to get them in on all sorts of different projects.
Council president's not.
Hello? No. she can't.
Rick. That's Ken's meeting now. Ken's meeting now. You gotta come up here. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
Sorry. You just stick me in the middle?
Yeah, man.
Stick me in the middle, so I get.
You're the director of planning. That's you.
Both sides.
Yeah, you're the director.
I can tilt it anyway. I had it that way just for the YouTube. Whatever works.
Check, yeah, test.
There you go. I did it right. Whenever you guys start speaking, the switch is on the bottom.
Okay.
Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate that.
You know what I have to do.
Okay, are we?
Steve, can you test that mic?
Test.
Test. Works.
All right, it's 6:04 p.m. Are we ready to start? Okay, well, welcome to the Planning Committee workshop. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As we continue the commemoration of Bob Doherty. Okay, the Council President Mantello could not be here tonight, so as President Pro Tem, I'm starting up the meeting, and I'll take the roll, and then I'm going to hand it over to Councilperson Gully, who's coordinated this meeting. So I guess we also start attendance with Councilman Gully. Here. Councilperson Ash McPherson.
Here.
Councilperson Steele.
Present.
Councilperson Cummings.
Present.
Councilperson McDermott.
Here.
Council President Mantello is absent, and Councilman Zalewski is here. 6 present, 1 absent, and that almost never happens, by the way. I should mention that. I can't remember the last time that Carmela's missed a meeting.
The meeting was scheduled last minute.
True. No fault of Carmela's. It was a last-minute meeting. Okay, I'm going to hand this over to Councilperson Gully.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. For the council, the reason to be here for my purpose is to get educated, get information, get a plan of what direction we move in with the reports that we receive, and once we receive those, how we take those in, interpret them, and we ask questions to get a final determination on the secret process. Tonight, it's about learning about the secret process. I'd like to kind of keep the focus on that through the questions that are on the form. As you know, we all received part one, which was the developer Kevin Vandenberg had handed in.
Part two.
And part two is the identification of the project impacts, which is our process.
You have part two with you?
Between this report, the
Yeah,
information that we received from the developer and his team, and our homework, and we'll have enough information to make a logical, legal decision on that piece of property. So what I'd like to do is start off by asking one of the three gentlemen at the front table who would like to start on this, on educating us first, the secret process as we move forward, and the focus of the differences and determination towards each question that we need to know to make a good decision. So I don't know who would like to start.
Excuse me, Chair. Could I just ask if everybody introduced themselves before they speak?
That would be
Because
great.
our audio record, we need to get the identification.
That would be great. Gentlemen, if you could introduce yourself first, before we get into this, then we will continue with whoever you think should lead the process on, from today forward.
I am Richard Morrissey, the Corporation Counsel of the City of,
Switch on the ball. I didn't bring part two.
Richard Morrissey, the Corporation Counsel of the City of Troy.
Steve Strikeman, Commissioner of Planning.
Aaron Vera, city engineer.
He's,
Brian Osterhout with Environmental Design Partnership, consulting engineer.
you want me to- Council members, we had a meeting preparatory to this, the three of us did, and there is I guess there are two things that I need to talk about first, and I don't want to disrupt your questions too much, but one of them is a disruptive matter. First of all, as you may or may not know, you're going to ultimately have two decisions to make here. Well, maybe more than two, depending upon how this goes. But I mean, the ultimate decision will be whether or not to change the proposed zoning. Are you hearing me? Okay.
People in the back cannot hear you.
Okay. The ultimate decision will be whether or not to change the proposed zoning from an R1 to a P plan development. That is a type 1 action. That's what causes the seeker process to occur. That is inherently a political question, at least in my opinion. All right, that is something that you can take the temperature of the community, and you can decide that as a matter of public policy. The other question that you're faced now in the secret process is whether or not you should make a positive declaration that there will be significant environmental impacts from the project that's contemplated, or a negative declaration that the environmental impacts will not be that significant. That question is much more rigorous in the sense that it has to be fact-based. You have to base your decision on the facts as you understand them, not necessarily on other people's opinions. So I wanted to draw that distinction because we have, the clerk has received a petition under General Cities Law, Section 83, which, if the petition is perfected, will require that the zoning change be enacted by a 3/4 majority, which in the case of this council means that there has to be 6 favorable votes. I've looked at the petition. In my initial review, I'm not sure that it is sufficient to trigger the council's action, and I am probably going to advise the petitioners of that fact, and they may be able to provide additional information that will make that petition sufficient. So I just wanted you to go into this with that knowledge that if they perfect their petition, that the ultimate question of the zoning ordinance will be subject to that 3/4 voting, supermajority voting requirement. Is that
Rick,
right?
can I interrupt you for a minute? Can you turn up that mic, please? People in the back are having a hard time hearing off that mic. And Asha, do you know what button it is? How's that, Rick? Could you give that a try?
Testing. That's really loud. Okay, I do. Sure. So
That's loud.
now it's loud. So does everyone understand what I just tried to distinguish for you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I mean, if there are any questions, I could take that on that right now.
Chair.
Councilman Gully.
So, Rick, you said that you're in the process of reviewing that petition and that there's pieces of it that will need to be refined in order to actuate that situation of a supermajority. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the petition is an originally signed petition by a number of different people who have pieces of property listed next to their names, and the petition claims that they are the owners of those properties. But the operative question in the statute is whether or not we have the owners of 20% of the property in a certain location. And the petition itself doesn't specify. So the question is, in my opinion, it is the petitioner's burden to substantiate the requirement under the general city law to provide some evidence that the signatures that they have acquired represent the owners of 20% of the property, most likely opposite to this 10-acre parcel.
Do we have a process to validate signatures on that petition, or is that something that we do to make sure that the homeowners actually were involved in the petition?
That is a question, and that's something that you're probably very familiar with election law. There is no statutory requirement that the petition be verified. So the petition itself doesn't have to be verified, but I'm probably going to ask for some kind of verified proof that they represent at least 20% of the owners of the land.
Thank you.
And that doesn't mean someone couldn't challenge the petition. Some interested party couldn't challenge the petition, but there is no statutory requirement that the signatures be verified.
Other questions?
Okay.
You should make clear that that's just not for the seeker, that's just for the zone change, right?
Steve would like me just to clarify one more time that is only for the zoning change. That doesn't have anything to do with the seeker itself.
Right.
Thanks.
So, Aaron, you had some stuff to say this afternoon that was useful.
About seeker or
About seeker in general. I don't know if you want
Yeah, Aaron, just to start off on the seeker process as you see it, and then we'll go through these pieces on the questions, and we'll talk about different things we might need to get the information we need to make a justified decision.
Sure. I mean, generally speaking, the seeker process is about determining the areas of potential impact. So for a project of this magnitude, those categories would typically be stormwater, traffic, perhaps sewer, water capacity, potentially impact on school systems and things like that. And, the applicant, given the status of the project as a type 1 action, it's the applicant's burden to provide that information so that the council can make a determination. Obviously, it's in the applicant's interest to provide information for a negative declaration. That process typically can take months of time where, the council asks for data. That data is provided. It may be incomplete, or it may pose new questions. The council may ask that some of that information be reviewed by third-party experts. That's a very brief overview of where you guys are at. At this point, you've heard quite a bit of public comment. In my opinion, public comment is not the basis for a decision. It's simply informational, provides you guys a feeling for where the public is at with the project and the things that are of concern to them. But again, in my opinion, studies or other documentation provided by the public is not something that the council can use in order to make this determination. The information used should be obtained from the applicant's professionals or from third-party experts employed by the council.
First off, Aaron has a lot more experience with seeker than I do, but I respectfully disagree a little bit with Aaron there. I mean, I agree that seeker is not a referenda type decision. You don't go out and take the political temperature of the community and say, well, everyone's against it. It is a fact-based decision. Where you get those facts, I mean, the public can provide facts, experts can provide facts. As long as those facts are substantial and substantiated, all right, you can get them anywhere, including you can get them from the applicant or the Friends of the Mehicantuck if they have good information, right? So that's my legal opinion. What was it? What else was it you said? You said that.
I think that was the main bullet points of it.
That's it.
Unless they have specific questions about individual items on it,
right.
Information.
Yeah, I just wanted to give an example of, for example, I mean, we all know that there are significant archaeological resources on that site. An example, the council. Normally, what I understand occurs is that the applicant uploads that information to Chris, which is part of the state SHPO.
It's State Historic Preservation Office, but it's
State Historic Preservation Office. They upload it to their program, and then SHPO reviews that information and comes back with recommendations with respect to how those archaeological resources might be salvaged, treated, or ignored, or perhaps ignored. But it's up. They are experts in that field. They look at this stuff all the time. That might be further. I would expect that would be further information that the council will want to have and will await before it makes a final secret determination.
And I'll just add in, obviously, I sent out Aaron and I sat down and began a little review of the seeker, and we determined we needed a little more information, which is why we are where we are right now, where we actually discussed with the developer some of the additional information that we're requiring, and we haven't received that yet. But when the part 2 is filled out, which answers whether or not there's a little or large impact, then you're looking at both the part 1 and you're looking at the supplemental information that was provided. And again, if you don't feel there's enough information at that point, you could request further information.
Councilperson Ashton Pearson.
Thank you. What I want to ask is, there had to be an archaeology look on that property before. Do we have that report as well? Are we going to be able to get that report? Is that going to be part of this?
We do have the archaeological report.
Right.
So that was included in the narrative.
Right. But what I'm talking about is that's for the first dig that they went from when they had to do the piping for the water line?
I'm not sure when.
I'm not certain, but I had the impression that it came from that originally.
Okay.
But I can't
Okay, that's what I
Say that
wanted to
for
know, if
sure.
that was a new one or if it was that one, okay.
We can ask the applicant that for sure.
Chair,
Councilperson Cummings.
so from my understanding, it sounds like your concern is that we may not have enough information at this point in order to fully fill out the part two. Is it normal to have full studies be the answer to that at this point versus, asking the yes or no question? It's relatively simple questions. What's the strategy behind having a full study be done at this point versus being done under a proper scoping process?
Sure. Well, I can't answer with the scoping process. So you're suggesting an environmental impact statement, but as far as the traditional site plan review process, it's common when a project is subject to state permitting that it is implied that they cannot continue with the project without obtaining those state permits. This project is substantial enough in size that it's subject to the general speedies permit for construction activities. It's a 10-acre site. They're disturbing more than 1 acre. The site drains to the Hudson, not to our combined sewer system, which goes to the sewage treatment plant. So therefore, it's subject to that permit. DEC has a process that requires the applicant to notify DEC of all other permits required. That's triggered by the speedies permit. There's other ways to trigger it, but it's at least triggered that way. So what's also triggered is review and sign off by SHPO. Review and sign off for any other DEC permits, any DOH permits that might be required, sewer extensions, anything like that. So again, in my opinion, the council doesn't need to have final documentation on those items. They typically can't be provided until the project is actually done. In fact, archaeology isn't done until construction. Okay, because the process is you establish where the sensitive areas are. You establish a plan that satisfies SHPO that you've done everything you can to avoid it, right? SHPO they don't look to, when they say avoid it, they mean avoid it with your proposal, not shrink your proposal to avoid it. Just avoid it as best you can given the density and the improvements that you are proposing to make to the property. I believe the applicant has begun that process, which is commonly referred to as phase 2, right? The avoidance of it. That's followed by phase 3. SHPO will only issue a letter stating they've accepted the artifact recovery plan, which is phase 3. But phase 3 is not complete until construction. They go in first before they start building and they go in and they carefully excavate those areas, recover artifacts, and those artifacts are then cataloged. A report is sent to SHPO. SHPO accepts the report. The artifacts are given back to the owner, and that's the end of it. In my experience, I've worked on a number of projects that have identified archaeological sites. I've worked on sites that have, historic shaker structures, foundations, artifacts. I've worked on several projects that go all the way to a phase 3. I haven't had a pos deck determined as a result of needing that permit. So the fact that there is archaeological significant anything, even a historic building, an owner is able to do what they like with the property as long as they follow that permitting process. And I don't think the city's in a position when it comes to stormwater or archaeology or any of these other aspects that are state regulated to, be stricter than that, right? We don't have any laws or regulations or anything in place to trump the state's historic review process or the state's stormwater review process.
So are you arguing that those processes should be not included in our secret review because they're not going to happen until the state permitting process?
I think those should be taken as far as they can be, but they cannot be complete before a secret determination. just, it's not.
So what are we waiting for the determination?
I think a letter from SHPO for acceptance of their phase 2 plan to demonstrate that the applicant's done everything they can to avoid, or at least SHPO is satisfied that they've done what they can to avoid it. A stormwater management plan could be prepared and reviewed. Beyond that, I don't think that the board needs more information for those two particular areas. We did talk about a traffic study. We've talked about some other things, but generally speaking, seeker needs to take place. A determination needs to be made. The zone change needs to be voted on. And once there's a zone change, the entire project has to go back through site plan review with the planning commission.
Well,
And that is where final plans will be prepared for actual construction.
no, that would be segmentation as far as I understand it. That if we didn't include those site plans and the real facts of them in our seeker process now, my understanding is the planning commission can't in the future.
That is not segmentation. Segmentation is when you consider something in isolation. That's not what Aaron is saying. Aaron is talking about that there are practical limits to the depth you can go to before the project is actually under construction or built. That doesn't mean that the seeker process doesn't include the concept of maximum build 240 units, 3-4-story structures located in an approximate location within an acre set aside for stormwater management and stuff like that. You are considering the entire project or this zoning proposal in the context of the project. The fact that you don't have every planning detail, every setback, or or the location of every parking space doesn't mean that you're segmenting the process. The other thing I wanted to say is this is a real process. You have to approach it in good faith. If your mind is already made up, you really are not acting properly as a deliberative body here. Scoping takes place only after you've decided that there are such environmental impacts that a positive deck is required. We don't go to scoping. Right now, we're just trying to figure out whether or not, the question before you is to figure out whether or not the environmental impacts, and there are definitely some environmental impacts, are of such significance that a full environmental impact statement will be required. And part of that is to be led, I think, you have to rely on the state agencies, as Aaron said. You have to rely on experts who have experience with these things, because I never built a project before, and neither did any of you that I know of. So I urge you strongly, try to keep, your job right now is just to take a hard look at the environmental impacts to decide whether or not this is positive or negative deck. All right, you should just do that in good faith. Right, you don't have to be experts yourselves, but you have to listen to the facts and not just the feelings. Sorry, I didn't mean to lecture.
I think it was a great explanation. So, Steve, as we start our endeavorment with part 2, and we start to get the reports in which, do you have any type of idea? Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, I was going to go through what we're working on, if that's helpful to anyone.
Say that again, sir. Say it more sweeter.
All the supplemental studies that are currently underway, that's what that brief presentation had tonight.
Unfortunately, the fact that this is a workshop with no public input, we're unable to allow you to do that. But you can, well, that if.
We can have presentation. Ideally, we would open up the floor for people to make comments, but I think we can.
Right.
I will say that's how it normally works at the planning commission, but I understand this is the city council and the rules are different.
Don't open up a can of worms here. What I'm saying, I don't want to
I don't think there's
offend anybody or not offend anybody. I want to just kind of make sure it's right for everybody.
We can There are a couple solutions. One is we could schedule another workshop where the applicant can put forward all this stuff, or the applicant can provide us with the information as to, what studies they're engaged in right now, and we can provide that to the council.
Councilperson Ashman first.
Or you can open up this meeting.
Thank you. I was under the assumption that we were gonna be getting more information tonight. And if this is something that they're giving to us for information, I think that's part of the workshop, isn't it?
And that would be another solution too. You can do, I mean, if the council agrees to open it up to a presentation by the applicant, that's fine.
But that's what I.
That's where you'll just get information.
Yeah, okay, go.
If Adam Schultz on behalf of the applicant, we were asked to attend and we were asked to put together a presentation solely for the purpose of educating the council in regard to what we have been requested to do and what is underway. And it ties in, it's not an advocacy piece at all. It's informational. It ties in directly.
We understand that. We're gonna settle that in a second.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have, I'm going to make a motion based on what's happening tonight that we open up the meeting to public comment, which would include representatives of the developer, would include representatives of the Friends of the Mehicantuck, basically anyone that's here, where we will open it up as long as the comments are done in a way that's more of a, this is a workshop, so these should be presentations, not confrontational type discussions. Okay, so we'll take a vote on that right now as a council to see if we want, I'm completely happy to do that. I just talked to Councilman Gully about this as well. So originally.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to open this up to a public comment, including anyone that's here this evening. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. 6 in favor, 0 opposed. This is now open to a public comment as well. Thank you. Yes, you can, Steve, you can hand that off to.
Yeah, I'll hand it off to Brian Osterhout.
Can everyone see? So thanks again for having us tonight. I'm going to keep my presentation relatively brief. Just wanted to inform the council of the studies that are underway in support of the information that's contained within your environmental assessment form. So,
Excuse me 1 second, sir. Yeah, why don't we, let's just let him continue with the presentation. Thank you. I'm sorry
You
about
can
that.
sit over on that side, you can see. If anybody would like to see that presentation, you can sit on that side of the room. You should be able to see. You can turn that screen just a tiny bit. But if you're interested in a presentation, just get on that other side. Not that much. Much closer. All right, guys. Can you see this?
thank you, sir. So just to give a little bit of a project overview, it's currently zoned R1. So the applicant has the right to develop single-family houses. And so that's a concept plan that was prepared by the previous engineer working on the project for what a single-family development would look like within this development. So, part of the discussion has been, what to do with this parcel. I mean, the parcel has an as-of-right use to be developed for at least single-family homes, just with its existing zoning as it is. This is the concept plan that was presented as part of the submission. It includes approximately 231 apartments, which is 3 buildings, docks, a multi-use path, pedestrian connections, and public kayak launch on 10 acres in the city of Troy and 1 acre in Scottsdale. And just for comparison, to just understand environmental impacts, because again, I think it's important to look at the context of what could be developed under existing zoning versus what could be developed under the requested zone change. This is just a quick summary of, the fact that under both scenarios, trees are removed, green space, vary slightly between the two aspects. The proposal that we have would not be a residential subdivision. It would be apartment complex with HOA, so the roads, the water and sewer would be maintained privately instead of by the city. 2 curb cuts versus 3 within the proposed single-family residential. The single-family residential would not provide public access to the waterfront. Ours, the apartment concept would. Both have on-site stormwater, as Mr. Barra had mentioned. And in both scenarios, you're dealing with archaeology either way. And that gets triggered, as Mr. Barra said, because you're going for stormwater permit. So as part of the seeker review of the project, the applicant is currently preparing assessments, analysis, and studies regarding, as you've been talking about tonight, archaeology. We have Harkin Archaeological Associates out of Troy. I think they're the largest archaeological consultant in upstate New York working on this project. We are advancing a traffic study by Craig Manning Engineering. We're doing a stormwater pollution prevention plan, stormwater modeling for various storm events with pre and post stormwater conditions. We're advancing visual simulations of view sheds and assessing alternatives. So a lot of work is being done to try to provide enough information to the council to make an informed decision. From the archaeology standpoint, the site is located within a broader area. Most of the capital region is of widespread occupation by First Nation people and does not contain any unique resources that haven't been found in certain areas. So there is a process, as Mr. Vera had mentioned, for this. It's through the State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation and through the Cultural Resource Information System. And so that's a process by which SHPO reviews the information, makes assessments, and then makes recommendations based on that. As I mentioned, Harkin Archaeological Associates, state-approved archaeologists, they're working with OPRPHP on this, and the findings and recommendations will be followed. So, I mean, they have to do what the state requires. Just like in stormwater, you have to meet certain criteria. On the traffic side, as I mentioned, traffic assessments being progressed by Craig Manning, and will include background information, traffic volume data, existing conditions review, future traffic volumes, and a traffic analysis with build and no-build conditions. From the stormwater side, we, as I mentioned, are preparing a stormwater pollution prevention plan, modeling pre and post stormwater flows for various storm events, designing stormwater treatment for quality. Stormwater will be maintained on site. It's required to be. We can't shed stormwater off site to adjacent property owners. And usually when there's CSO within the city of Troy, usually there's a part of a project that becomes some kind of a CSO mitigation project. We haven't gotten that far with the city yet, but that could be part of the project as well. And it could be off-site. In other words, assisting the city with some kind of CSO mitigation improvement project as part of the pools project. From a visual analysis, we're going to do visual analysis or visual simulations depicting existing and proposed simulations using computer modeling, and prepare a view shed analysis and profile views. Sorry, I didn't get the feedback. And just for context, these are developments within 1 mile of what we're proposing. They may be on the other side of the river, but this is not anything that's completely out of context along the Hudson River in these areas. Economic impact, it's something I believe has come up. Jobs and wages during construction and operation, including direct and indirect effects, are something that goes into the seeker determination as well. And then there's a community character piece of this, which really is consistency with the city's comprehensive plan. And in looking at the city's comprehensive plan that was done in 2018, Realize Troy, there are sections of that comprehensive plan that are very strong to this project in terms of neighborhood infill with higher density housing to reduce urban sprawl and provide new housing stock to attract more younger crowds to this area and not lose them to neighboring cities and counties where there's newer housing stock. It does, this comprehensive plan obviously promotes pedestrian connections, which this project does include, and provides a key access to the Hudson River, which is mentioned numerous times throughout the comprehensive plan. So from our perspective, we provide the pedestrian connections, access to the Hudson River. We're proposing a public kayak launch, multi-use path, increased tax revenue to the city, modern housing stock, as I mentioned, to retain residents and provide for attractive future development within the area. And, from the applicant's perspective, this is very consistent with the 2018 comprehensive plan. So thank you for your time, and I'll try to keep it short and sweet.
Could you give us your name one more time?
Sure, it's Brian Osterhout with EDP.
Who?
EDP, Environmental Design Partnership. We're consulting engineers.
Thank
So
you.
we're the engineers working on the grading and the stormwater and all that.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Brian, quick question for you. That
course.
presentation, can
Yes.
you make that available
Yep.
to the council?
Yep.
Sure.
Councilmember Cummings.
I have two quick questions. One, kayak lunch, is the marina off the table now, or is that in addition?
Marina,
At one point, there was discussion of a marina. Is it now just a kayak lunch?
it's just a kayak launch and docks for the residents.
Oh, docks, okay.
Yeah, but not a marina.
Not a public marina, but.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, that makes sense.
Sure.
Second question, since you mentioned you're doing stormwater.
Yep.
One of the things that has been sort of confounding is the big oval for stormwater retention in the northernmost part of the lot.
Mhm.
That's the part that is in Scatacoke. And there was some uncertainty with how we tell them what's going to happen there, because at this point it's just a big oval that says stormwater.
Yeah,
Can you elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, so those ovals are generally shown in the conceptual phase of that. We get into detailed in the grading plans, which we're currently progressing now, so that we can provide that to the city. And then, like I said, we have to make it work from a stormwater perspective. So we go through, and that more detailed design will include treatment practices for runoff reduction, channel protection, flow, things of that nature. In this instance, the Hudson River is a fourth order stream, so we don't have to treat for quantity because it's such a large body of water. But we do have to treat for quality. So that's one thing that will be an improvement in this, is that we have to slow it all down and make sure that we follow the DEC's stormwater management design manual in accordance with all those practices. This, as Mr. Vera mentioned, would be subject to general permit 020-001 from the DEC, which requires filing of a notice of intent and weekly stormwater inspections during construction. And so there might be additional stormwater measures throughout the site. Generally, the site is, it'll probably be mostly wet practices for treatment. So that's kind of what we're looking at now. But yeah, we have to do that modeling. And post-development has to be less than or equal to pre-development flows on the site. I mean, it's a process by which it just has to work. So that's what we do as designers.
Okay, thank you. So you're just in the starting phases of that design, it sounds like.
We're in the middle of it right now, actually, yes. Yep.
Great.
I think Steve wants to
Yep.
contribute to that.
And I just want to add that the town of Scatacoke, I've spoken to Tim Salisbury there, represents both the town of Scatacoke and the Scatacoke Planning Board. They are an involved agency. They had no objection to the city acting as lead agency, but we will be working with them through the whole planning, if this gets to planning through that process.
Great. Thank you.
Other questions?
Do you mind if I ask a question of the developer?
Why not?
Have you considered or undertaken a biological resource study?
That's actually a great question. There are no threatened and/or endangered species. The only thing that's located within this area is damselflies, and they require a certain habitat that's not within the developed portion of this project. That's not something that we state, that's on the DEC environmental mapper. So from our perspective, there are no other threatened or endangered species on this property.
So you've already,
That all gets coordinated with Natural Heritage Program, New York Natural Heritage Program. Yeah. And Fish and Wildlife is part of that, but Fish and Wildlife, there's no threatened or endangered species. Bats are not one of the listed issues here. Northern long-eared bat, which commonly is throughout the entire Northeast in certain areas, is not one of them. Like I said, it's just damselflies.
so that is a representation you'll be able to make to the council that there.
Absolutely. Yep, that'll be part of the submissions.
Anything else you'd like to add on?
No,
Good.
I just wanted the council to be aware of the fact that there's a lot of time and energy being expended to provide you additional information.
Do you have a timeline for when you think these reports might be in our hands?
Yeah, I thought that question may come up tonight. So we're working as diligently as possible. I have not heard back from the traffic consultant. That takes a little bit of time. I know the archaeological consultant's working on their piece. We're working on ours. You know, a safe bet would be within 60 days. Hopefully sooner if we can do that, but that's kind of my rough in my head timeline that, you know, I would imagine all these studies kind of coming together.
Are you going to bundle them together or will you send them as they become?
No, I'll bundle them all together.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
I have a question. Never mind. Brian, you mentioned economic development being part of a secret. Can you explain that? I thought secret was really about the environment and like Rick just asked about the biological implications. Where does economic development fit into that?
Sure. So there's ancillary things within the seeker itself, you know, impacts to the community, impacts to schools, for example, things of that nature. So I think that is a slight piece of it. From, you know, in looking at this project, I don't think it's necessarily one of the larger things that's being studied, but, you know, it comes into community character, resources that the, you know, fire, emergency, those kinds of things that, you know, can they serve the site? Can they serve the proposed development?
So to follow up on that, so because we're now lead agency,
Yep.
if that's part of what we have to consider, that's a whole other, I mean, that's probably, well, I think Steve would probably be involved in something like that. But in terms of economic development, then we have to start weighing things like the tax revenue that the project would generate versus the strain on city resources to kind of figure out, is this economically advantageous to the city? So if that's part of what that's something that we then, right, is that correct, Steve? That we have to also start postulating on?
Well, is that, I give that to Aaron.
It's not it's only if you believe there would be a significant impact and you need an adverse impact and you need information to convince you otherwise. You know, obviously, apartments tend to be, you know, not habitated by families. Generally speaking, there's less children as a result of an apartment development, right? So, you know, impact on schools and things like that could be, you know, very briefly summarized by the developer. If the council needs additional information above and beyond, you know, that kind of cursory review, then you need to request that of the developer specifically, you know. There isn't, as far as I'm aware, there's not like a standard, you know, financial study packet that, you know, like it's not like a traffic study where it's, you know, A, B, C, D, right? It's kind of how far do you want to take that, right? You know, obviously, both of the proposals tonight, a private subdivision with a private road or the apartments have less of an impact on city resources than dedicating a street for a subdivision or something like that, right? Something where we'd have to maintain the sewers and the water systems and the roadways, right? But you'd have to provide a little bit more guidance if you're looking for additional information beyond the number of children expected to, you know, be in the development.
Yeah, and if I might too, I mean, you have to realize, I mean, we're just looking at a residential development here, but, you know, secret contemplates any action within the state of New York. So you're talking about Global Foundries in Malta. Obviously, from an economic standpoint, that probably has a much broader look at than something residential. I just brought it up because it kind of touches on that a little bit, but again, from a residential perspective, it's not something that's usually honed in on.
Yeah, 'cause I usually don't think of economics overall as part of an environmental review. But it's interesting if that is part of it, that it's something else we have to look at.
I think it's, I think my understanding is that because it is a residential development, that it's a lesser part. I mean, I'm pretty sure the developer wants to emphasize that they're going to be a tax-paying entity in the city of Troy,
Yeah, actually, now that I look at it, it's not a specific section. It's just
Yeah,
buried in
looking
there.
through this
Yeah.
secret part too, there isn't any specific section there.
I have a question. I really don't know the answer to this, and I don't have the background, but I heard Councilman Zaluski bring up a safety impact. And I know one way or another, one of those two pictures you showed tonight would be on that property, right? The single-family homes for, the developer has a right to vote one or the other. We go back to that first slide you had there.
Sure, hold on one second, I can get there.
And when I was looking at that, I was trying to think about that, and my question is, it would seem to me that having the development project go through the 230 apartments would significantly reduce safety, any type of safety expense, because in here, you've got, I don't know how many homes are there, but that's, if you're getting called one time to each one of those homes, you're going to different spots, you're covering that road, there's more road to plow, snow, clean, take care of, maintain. But in the project, that would lessen the impact because they'd only have one targeted spot, one building, two buildings, or three buildings to go to. And I don't know if I'm right or not, just looking at that, I'm thinking, one of those two pieces, one of those two pictures are gonna end up on that property. So my thought is, when I'm thinking about it, I think it's less of a safety impact with a project that's more condensed and spread out throughout there. And I think that with that picture, there's really no amenities that would really recognize the Hudson River properties. Like, those are people's yards, right? And back of that going to.
That's correct. The single-family residential doesn't contemplate a public
So there'd
access
be
to
nothing
Hudson.
there that would actuate the Hudson River, the history of the Mahitutuck Indians in that area, nothing. And just be fences, right? And they go right up to the water, so.
They would. Those rear houses would have
Fine.
water access.
All right, good, thank you. I appreciate the information.
Chair,
Councilmember Cummings.
where do we get actual facts about fire department impact in particular? I think that fire district is one of the more stressed and quite a distance from this site, as everything in the city is. And I think obviously if you have
And I
seen
didn't,
any apartment building in the
Yeah.
city, they get a lot of calls.
well, and the one thing I didn't get was information from similar projects, but that's what I would do is compare that to similar type projects, similar income level, similar sizes, and rents, and find out what the response rates are on those right now, and I can make that available to the city council.
Okay,
But
that's something we'll do internally then?
yes,
Okay, great.
at least for our experience in the city of Troy. Yes.
Okay. And then just to loop back, we talked about the state permits required. My understanding is that does trigger the CP 29 outreach. When does that happen? How does that happen?
That was the DEC one.
Are you talking about
Rule 29, the
The
DEC,
extended outreach in
the
areas of environmental justice.
justice. Yeah, that was the DEC one. Remember we
Oh.
talked about that
I
today.
don't think,
I don't think it,
I don't have that with me.
what'd you do with
it's a
that letter?
form, right?
Yeah, no.
I think all that triggers is a requirement to complete a form.
Yeah.
For DEC.
Well, it requires a plan for broader public.
I think you're misreading the statute. I think, or the regulation. I think that broader public participation component is available for state projects. And that's how I read the regulation. but not for local. It didn't apply to local projects.
Even though the state permit is required.
Even though I think that's all that's going to be required.
I believe you're correct. We can certainly get you more information on it just to make sure we're
Thank you.
clear. Yep.
That's when I remember, because some of the other public commentators in previous meetings had brought it up. I looked at the regulation and I said, gee, I think that, this really only applies to DEC projects.
Interesting.
I don't know, we've got another attorney. Disagree.
I don't think that I should be advising the board.
No, I'm asking you to find me.
I can answer it this way. The public, I'm sorry, yeah,
And give us your name.
sure, it's Adam Schultz, attorney for the applicant. CP 29, you can read it probably both ways, and the way that Mr. Cummings is referring to it and the way that Mr. Morrissey is referring to it. But what I can tell the board is this, or the council, sorry, is what CP 29 requires is additional outreach. So just by way of example, if we had to put a notice in a newspaper because there was a meeting coming up, CP 29 would actually require what's known as a public participation plan. And it's just to ensure that extra efforts are made to reach out in these identified communities. We have no issue whatsoever in making sure that public participation plan is prepared and adhered to.
Great. What's the timeline for the preparation of that plan? When would that take place? Would that be in this secret process, or would that be later during the?
It's not actually related to the secret process, but it will happen at the same time.
Okay.
So, yeah, consistent. Do it.
Questions?
Chair, I have a question.
Councilmember Ashby first?
It just popped in my head, and I'm trying to, this picture that you have up there now, the diagram there, that's for single-family homes, correct?
Yes, correct.
So the roads within that area,
Mhm.
who would maintain them?
Yes, so those would be dedicated over to the city of Troy. So the city of Troy would own and maintain those roads, so they would snow plow them. They would, typically when you do a residential subdivision, those roads are then dedicated over to the city upon completion. There's a process for that, and then the city owns and maintains them forever.
And if it's the apartments,
Yep.
who maintains them?
The HOA,
The
homeowners
city's not
association.
responsible
City's
for
not
it.
responsible for the internal roads within that now. Same thing for the internal, so, and that goes back to one of the slides that I had. So there's, not quite half, but maybe a third of a mile, a little bit more than a third of a mile of roads that we would be talking about in the single-family residential. About 2,000 linear feet of water and sewer as well, versus, that's because those are alongside and within the public roadway, versus the multifamily, that's the responsibility of the HOA. So that's maintained by, all that stuff is internal and maintained by the HOA in that type of an arrangement.
Right.
But I don't want you to be misled, Kim.
Wait, go back to that?
You're going to say the same thing I'm going to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Go, excuse me.
In what Mr. Osterhout is saying is correct. However, he's presuming that the council will accept the dedication of the roads. The developer cannot just build a development and just say, now it's your problem. You have to accept it. And that normally takes, that becomes more of an issue in the actual planning process. Though that is zoned R1, in order to do a development of that size, it was shown to you, that would actually have to be planning board approved, and there would be a secret process associated with that. Okay, but no one can just build a road and say, here, city, now take care of it. Okay, it's up to the city council to accept a dedication.
Thank you.
That being said, there are alternatives to dedicating the road. The applicant could create an HOA that maintains the roads. And in effect, it would be the same plan, just legally how they get there is slightly different.
Okay.
So it,
Just trying to figure out.
the city council, whether or not they accept the roads is
The road could
is a
be-
completely separate issue to whether or not that could be built.
Can I, do you yield? But to be clear on that, if it's an HOA, then the city plows don't have to plow.
Absolutely correct. If it's an HOA, the way that would work is everyone would pay into, you know, the kitty and,
Right.
and that would pay for utilities and plowing and all of that. Yeah.
Because it was, Brian, just to be clear, I think what confused people is that was presented as, oh, if we do the single family option, oh, the city has to maintain the roads, and if we go apartments, well, then, you know, you guys would maintain the roads, but it's not either or to that extent. The city just doesn't automatically have to maintain roads if it's single family. There's an action for that
Right.
that we would have to approve.
They have to meet,
Yes,
they have to dedicate the roads, and the council has to accept the dedication.
But typically in single-family housing, residential developments, that is the normal process. Usually it varies once you start doing townhouses, condominiums, apartments, things of that nature, where you have enough people that it makes sense to have an HOA to maintain it separately.
This is similar to Linden Hills, right, which when it was built, I think they had a homeowners association that was maintaining the roads. I believe now the city is supposed to be maintaining.
Yeah, there's a number of subdivisions in the city that are similar to this. Yeah, or would be.
We have an issue now with High Point.
Oh, it's another one.
Yeah, right.
Who owns the roads, by the way? There, we don't know.
Well, I mean, there are some dedications, so I don't know.
Other questions, comments?
So, Chair,
Yes.
I guess if there's no comments, maybe we just focus on the questions that we'll be facing in part two. And maybe go through those with us and just give us the relevance of any report that we need to really focus on for each of the, part two, part one we already have is from the developer. But part two, maybe you'd help us with some of the, anything you think we should know on any of these particular questions.
Well, I mean, at this point, you're still waiting for additional information.
Yeah.
The nice thing about the part two is it tells you exactly where to look on the part one to find the answers. And then if there's additional information that's been supplied as well, I mean, they'll be, you know, related to, there's a section on transportation. There'll be a transportation study, so you'll look at that. I don't think we have any impact on geological features. Impact on surface water, you'll be looking at the part one as well as the studies, the water and sewer studies that they do. So, I mean, to walk you through all of them right now, if you look at, for instance, on the part one, let's just go, for example, impacts on surface water, number 3. And then there's the question there, the proposed, A is the proposed action may create a new water body. And then the relevant part one questions are in the next column. So you'll see there where to look back to be able to answer the questions. And again, there's some of them, I think some of them you may not be able to answer. And that's actually why Aaron and I looked at it and decided we need a little more information.
Steve, just a quick question. Was that ever emailed? Was that copy ever emailed to us? Because I know it was handed out at a meeting of a hard copy, but does anyone have a digital copy of it?
The part,
Okay, part two, could you send a digital copy to everybody?
I could, or you could just Google Seeker Part 2 or LEA. I can
I'm
try and
pretty
email it
sure
right now.
Pretty sure I
Yeah,
everything.
Yeah, I think I have. So, but I'd have to go back and look.
Isn't the EAF on the website too?
The
part 2 is just, you just,
yeah, the
throw it
part
in a
1's on the
Google.
website. I don't think the part 2 is.
Part 2 is not? Oh, it should be.
Part 2 is blank.
I know. We can try and get it up on the website for you,
Yeah, just makes it easier.
because part 1 is up there now.
Yeah, because I just Googled Seeker Long Form Part 2, and that's what I'm looking at
it's
on
on,
my phone
it's
right
on
now.
all your phones.
Is it?
You just
Okay.
sent it?
I just sent it,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you.
That was pretty quick.
Councilmember Cummings.
So looking at the impact on transportation, for example, first question is projected traffic increase may exceed capacity of existing road network. Why can't we answer that now?
So it's worth taking one step back. Okay. So each of these questions is going to have, you can think of it as a yes or a no, right? It's no, it's not going to have an impact, or yes, it is. Really, you're saying no or small impact, or you're saying moderate to large impact, right? So it's not that there isn't an impact. In order to categorize it as a moderate to large impact, it needs to be something, and I don't have the exact language, but it's in the secret documentation. It needs to be something that is not easily mitigated. So in the case of traffic, it's entirely likely a development this size, either of these developments, isn't going to generate enough traffic to require the installation of a signal. But if it did, the installation of a signal mitigates the impact. So it would be difficult for the council to defend a decision of a moderate to large impact when the developer has identified a potential impact and provided a very reasonable mitigation strategy for it. That's typically what this process is supposed to achieve during this phase. It's only if the developer is unable to mitigate something that you would then say it is going to have a moderate to large impact. And there are examples of things like this. The most recent example in the news was one of the malls. I think it was Crossgate, and Pyramid Group or whoever it is that manages the mall wanted to do a big development. And they were pause-decked because the development required a new interchange on the highway. And that's outside the developer's scope. He can't claim he's going to mitigate that impact. He doesn't own the highway. They pause-decked it. They went through the EIS process. The developer had to coordinate with state agencies and other landowners and come up with a plan to mitigate that. In this case, a development of this size, it is entirely likely no mitigation will be required aside from stop signs at the intersections. But even if it did, again, rise to the level of a signal, if the developer is willing to pay for the signal, that's a mitigation. Is that? Yeah.
Good.
Good on this for now.
I do have a question, because everybody has a different consideration of what the term low-rise building is. And I'm trying to get what you might see your focus as a definition. I know what Google says. I know what the world out there says. What do you consider when I say low-rise development?
Well, in the current city zoning ordinance, a dwelling, a multifamily low-rise is a dwelling not more than 40 feet high containing 3 or more dwelling units. So, am I looking at the right one? I'm looking at the wrong one. I'm looking at townhouse. Multifamily low-rise medium density apartment house, and it's the same thing. No more than 40 feet high, which contains 3 or more dwelling units. And that's not a condominium or townhouse. Regardless, either way, low-rise is 40 feet high. 40 feet high, 3 stories. Is that right? 3 stories.
Yeah, generally speaking, yeah.
Actually, 4 stories I moved.
Yeah, well,
You
and
gotta look for
yeah,
reputable
yeah.
sources, you can't get half the story.
The code isn't pretty good.
So, any other questions from council members on the secret process? Anything that you would like to know, and any question on part 2? And are there any questions that you think that we should hear from either the developer or one of his representatives as far as information?
Chair,
Councilmember
I have
McDermott.
a question for Brian. Can you go back to the project overview with the 3 larger units? And just point out the amenities of what the city is going to get with this.
Sure. So in this concept that was provided, There's a sidewalk connection that goes down, it's off this page, but it goes down, I believe, to 125th Street. It also provides a multi-use path through the property here that ends on the northern portion of the property, but also provides access to the river there. And a public kayak launch and access to the river there. So those would be the public amenities for this project. So it provides the public an opportunity to access the water, launch kayaks, not, full-scale boats or anything like that, but, and, multi-use path, which can be used for exercise, enjoying the river, et cetera, et cetera. And then a pedestrian connection down there to get people north.
Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Cummings.
Would it be economically unfeasible to provide those amenities in a single-family development?
It probably does change the economics substantially, but I'm not the developer, so I can't really answer that.
Chair, I have one question.
Well, Councilman Cummings has the floor right now. Okay, yielded to Councilmember McDermott.
If it is rezoned, there's 3 units here. Is there going to be any security features with it, cameras or lighting that the city will be able to utilize, or Troy Police?
Yes.
Well, that unless that's a condition of the rezone,
Okay.
that would be picked up by the planning commission during site plan review. So if
Yeah, I was just gonna say, do you want me to talk about?
The
Yeah.
developer would like, go ahead.
That will be part of the project, and the city will have
Right.
accessibility. The police department will be tied into the same system that will have for security.
Okay, thank you.
Is there something that we have to do as a city council to make sure it's
Sure.
It really the planning.
okay, so you could consider, so it's not simply a rezone, right? It's not yes or no to a rezone. The council needs to work up the language and the requirements for the rezone, right? So the idea of the planned use district or a PDD is that there's a public benefit. So if one of the public benefits the council would like to see is a camera system that the Troy Police has access to, that could be a condition of the rezone, as could, parkland or, this area to be remain wooded, any restrictions that the council sees fit, you could negotiate that with the developer.
I'll commit to that.
Can I just add one thing that might be helpful is to, the configuration might change slightly. This, when you're looking at a rezoning action, and council can correct me if I misspeak, but generally you are looking for bulk standards and does this fit and does this work? So we do that and you come up and you say, yes, 231 apartments, et cetera, parking for such and such number of vehicles, those kinds of things. That defines then, because as a planned district, it becomes legislation within the code itself. And so if a future developer were to come in or whatever, we have to go back and still go through site plan approval for the actual very detailed components of this. To the extent, though, that we have to design this to understand the impacts, that's what we're currently doing now. So we're running stormwater analysis on what is a preferred layout at this point, but it's so that you can make the assessment on that. But again, it has to go for the finer details, again, through site plan approval.
That's correct.
Chair.
But that doesn't mean they can't condition.
Sure.
the
Oh,
rezone.
absolutely.
Are you okay? Councilmember Gully.
So, Brian, my question, as I look at this project, I've had some people on site maybe have concerns of what it would look like to have these monstrous buildings there, but you know what? I've been on that property since the late 70s, so I know a lot about it. Probably more than most of you in the room. But I will tell you, I can't tell you on the speaker. But anyways, I can tell you this, the way those buildings are set, the way that ground level is, they'll be down a little so that really from the road, that view will not be a building in front of them, right? There's gonna be green in there.
Yeah, so in the view shed analysis that we're gonna be doing, when you look at it, it's visible from the river, certainly. But you're right, it's the way that the grade works, it rises up from the river and then there's, There's a high point on there that
So
would get
let's
leveled
say
down.
If you're having these concrete blocks approved, really, you're just getting nervous for nothing, because we really have to have that.
I'm not gonna lead you down that determination tonight, but yes, we are going to do a visual analysis as part of this submission to help the council have information on that and understand what those impacts would look like.
Yeah, we'd like to know that, thank you.
With the council permit me, may I ask one question? I think on the EAF, excuse me, on the EAF, if I recall, and I haven't reviewed it recently, it said that there was, I thought it said that there was no cliff on the property. And on the southern end of the property, there's a fairly substantial height that basically falls straight down into the river. I just wonder, is that something that you're going to correct, or do you have any specific use, or are you not developing that, or if you remember?
Yeah, so there are certain areas of this waterfront that do have some steep grades on those, and that's why the multi-use path is located where it is on this concept. And again, it was another engineering firm that actually prepared this concept plan. I'm kind of newer to this project. But, we're currently working on that. We have to grade those in to work, so we're looking at all that. But, the intent would not be to, disturb those areas that are adjacent to the waterfront in that area. It's just.
It's a very nice view from the top.
Yeah, there are, but there are certainly some steep portions here. There's a water line that runs through the portion of the property as well. There's an existing drainage area here, which is why there's no development there. So,
That's a sewer overflow.
yes, but it's a drainage gully right now. So, to the extent that, there are certain things that guide our design principles, and that's one of them.
And you're fully aware of the water line?
Yes,
The easement,
yep.
you have the map of the easement?
Yes, yep, well, yes, it's
map
on a
of the
survey,
water
we
line.
didn't do the survey, but yes, I have a boundary survey with all that information on it.
Chair,
Councilmember Cummings.
you done? You're good? Okay, didn't
I'm
mean to
sorry,
interrupt.
I feel I'm speaking out of
No, you're, that's a couple questions. Let's see, you mentioned you were doing a alternatives analysis or something like that. Can you speak about what that is?
Yeah, so one of the things we're gonna be looking at is, what impacts there would be under a single family development, which is an as of right use, understanding it still has to go through planning board and so forth, versus this. And, that's why I was trying to draw the conclusions, because, everyone looks at an undeveloped piece of land and says, well, there's anything you do to it is an impact, and and there's some truth to that, but the idea is there is an as of right use within zoning to develop that property accordingly. So I think it's important to put it in the context of looking at what could be done there, and what is being proposed here for the zoning change, such that this commission can make an assessment in terms of whether or not they believe that poses a more significant adverse environmental impact that can't be mitigated. For example, like I mentioned, stormwater. Stormwater has to be done whether it's the single family development that we showed or it's this. If we disturb greater than 1 acre, it's a requirement by the DEC. It has to be done on every project we do. In fact, it drives every project we work on these days. It's just the way the stormwater regs have evolved and morphed over time. Same thing with the archaeology. Whether it's single family homes or an apartment complex, it's still a process we have to go through with OPR-PHP.
Okay. So those are the only two alternatives discussed in that alternative study?
Right now, sure, yep.
Okay.
I mean, that being said, there are alternative layouts that have been done in the concept phase that we've looked at, and I'm sure that those will be discussed to some extent in terms of why this layout works better with the existing grade topography, things of that nature, existing natural features. So I don't want to say there's just two alternatives, but the two main alternatives are the preferred concept versus a single family residential development.
I think the council should be aware, that as far as I know, there's nothing legally that would prevent the developer from designing that entire acreage for one house. I don't even think that would, and having a 10-acre lawn around it. So, that is also a possibility. That is not within the alternatives that they're discussing here, but that wouldn't even require, as far as I know, planning board approval. Other than what do you call it?
I think you need a building permit. You may need a SWIP still.
You'd analyze it for zoning requirements, but it wouldn't require zoning or planning review. It shouldn't require zoning review and wouldn't require planning review.
I'm sorry, Councilman.
I just have one question about this plan. There's a large, no man's land in the front there against the street, or sort of a,
Oh, these?
yeah.
Yeah, those, and again, we're constantly, working on these plans, so it might change a little bit between now and the additional material that you submit. But these are generally anticipated to provide vegetative buffers to the neighbors along Second Ave in this area. So here, and over in this corner to the south. So those were kind of to remain and not be turned into lawns and so forth in that concept plan. But again, we're working on a set of detailed plans that would be forthcoming. But yeah, sorry, it's not clear on that. But yeah, those were kind of undisturbed areas that were being left and kind of just to depict, that we were trying to give some visual buffers to the neighbors to that side.
Do you yield?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to recognize myself. So I'm glad Rick brought that up about building a single house, because my next question after we were talking about alternatives is, have you considered alternatives? Let me ask this question first. It's 3 apartment buildings as your proposal.
Correct.
Each apartment building having 80 units?
No, they're slightly different. There's 2 that are the same here. I want to say there's 72 each, and this one I think is 87.
Okay, so
Yep.
we'll say
Yeah,
averaging 80.
Comparable, right?
And then on your first diagram with the single family homes, how many homes was that?
It's 36.
36, okay. So my question is, have you considered alternatives such as 2 apartment buildings instead of 3? Have you considered 20 homes instead of 36? Like where do you, and I understand you're running a fiscal calculation on this
Sure.
to see, how economically viable it is, but where are some of your limits on that?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and honestly, I'm not the developer, so I'm not working on the pro forma for this to make it work financially. So I'd have to defer to them on that, but I'm sure there was some calculation that went into that.
So Kevin is here. If you
You want to talk
I
about?
can tell you one thing, Ken, Baron.
Okay, wait for the mic.
Sorry, Councilman Saluzzi. Is to keep it in fact that the single-family houses is a guy, and I'm building a couple in Troy right now. Up on 3rd Avenue, 115th, I have a single-family house we're doing right now. But you gotta bear in mind, it's $43.50 a thousand for taxes in the city of Troy. So to construct single-family houses on the property in a $200,000 market, you're at $9,000 a year in property taxes across from the trailer park, up past the dumpsters for Hannaford. Right, so it's a tough thing to weigh out how you're gonna market them, because if we're gonna market the single families, we're gonna get away from trying to utilize the river for the apartments because of the tax structure and because of what we're coming. It's a different philosophy when you're looking to invest your money for your house versus renting an apartment.
Sure.
You're gonna ride up, you're gonna across from the trailer park, you're gonna say, geez, I don't want to spend $200-some thousand for a house there and pay $10,000 a year in taxes. With the apartments, it's a little easier. It's a little easier to push some of these things through. So there's some marketing things that'll have to be done if we go single family.
Looks like you want to ask a question.
I have a follow-up on that. With the with the larger apartment building, as proposed, my understanding is it would require further zoning variances even beyond the P district in order to build something of this density?
I believe that's the case, because I believe the density in the P zone is 22.5 please don't quote me, but I believe it's 22 and a half units per acre. And they're slightly over that at 240 units, if that's where they're at. But if they, so are you under than that limit then?
We're pretty close.
You're close, okay. So if it might be a unit or two
Okay.
in that range, but you're correct. The P district, unlike other regulations, ours have an actual zoning
And
bulk regulations to it. Yeah.
Can we negotiate with the
Yeah.
developer in order to raise or not raise this, but to lower that?
No, only to raise. No, yes, you can negotiate. Yeah, you can negotiate that.
So, yeah, I mean, in the alternatives analysis, this is a very intensive design that has a much larger impact. Are you doing an analysis of what would one building look like, 80 units in terms of your financial analysis and in terms of how would that change the
I think
neighborhood
that we're
impact?
formulating this information on that as we speak.
Okay.
But I can tell you, in the capacity that we're talking now, that you're looking at a 500, and I'm using numbers off of what we did on Oakwood Avenue.
Yeah.
So this project is 5 times larger than that. So I spoke with the building department and I spoke with the city assessor. So if we multiply by 5 what we did on Oakwood Avenue, you're looking at a $500,000 a year tax bill, which represents in excess of 25 apartments on this complex alone are there to pay taxes alone. So when you say negotiate down, we can negotiate down quantities, but we can't negotiate down taxes.
Right.
And with the infrastructure expenses and everything that needs to be done with this thing, it's a trying piece. It's a deceiving piece because when you look at it from the road, it looks 200, 300 feet long. But when you come from the riverside, it's a quarter of a mile. So the thing projects out. So that makes bringing some of the infrastructure in and things like that more expensive. So yeah, there's some negotiation, and some of the things, apartments may disappear because of design elements.
Sure.
As we get into it. That's always the case as well. But I can bring down the amount, but we can never bring down the taxes. And when you got 10% of the units are strictly there every year to provide for the tax base.
Sure. Good. Yeah. So you're saying it sounds like you're working on that.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
And to follow up on that, because that was my initial question to Brian. So you are thinking about, the proposals that we're seeing right now, I would assume are the max proposals, the max number of single-family homes, the max number
Correct.
of apartment buildings.
Correct.
But you're also looking at possible reductions that could be.
I would have to say, yeah. And the more information that we bring in, the more focused we become. We define things to go into that. The beauty of the way that we have the apartments worked out was we were maximizing the amount of treed area undisturbed. We were trying to protect the people to the south and the people to the north and minimize the impact on the trees and on the natural foliage on the property. Where single families were all over the place then.
But when you said the $500,000 tax bill,
Yep.
were you talking about your apartment proposal?
Apartment complex.
Right, but let's say you scale back from 3 to 2 apartment buildings.
Okay, but when you scale back,
Yeah.
you're eliminating maybe some building it, but the infrastructure costs, you still got to bring the water and sewer in. You still got to bring all that. There's a ton of getting everything in there.
Sure.
That sometimes eliminating property, but it does nothing for the expense of what you're doing to service the property.
Right, but the tax bill wouldn't be the same.
No, it
I want
wouldn't
to
be
be
the
clear.
same.
The tax bill would go down.
But the
based on-
proportion would be the same, Ken. The percentage of units there to service debt is going to be pretty close because I think when there's a number drop, so does the tax. So you're looking at there's a demand. The tax is a big part of it. And especially in Lansingburg, where the school tax a lot. And don't forget, the city Lansingburg school districts were closed for last year, not because of COVID. They were closed because of money, because of finances. That's why they were doing all the remote learning and everything like that. And this pays a pretty good property tax, or pretty good school tax. You know, and as you look, and as part of our hopefully our studies that we're doing now will show there's very little impact on the school district with apartments. Because we don't do they're not 3-bedroom apartments. They're not, you know, you're not going to get a lot of larger families or anything in there.
Sure.
Where the single family homes will.
Councilmember Gully, then Councilmember Cummings.
So in saying that, there'll be more of an impact to the schools with the single family
Oh,
homes.
without question.
So my second question would be that if the apartment complex was the focus and you were forced or asked to lower down the amount of units or, you know, eliminate one building, how does that affect the amenities that you would be bringing to the table for a city? Because you're gonna lose
I don't
money,
think it
so-
would have an effect on that.
So you don't think that would change?
No,
it?
honestly, I as much as I want to stand here and say it would, I don't think it would affect
All right.
what we're offering to the city. I'm hoping it doesn't. I'm hoping there's a couple situations now that we're going to have to deal with from some of the opposition that I can tell you right now is going to have some kind of an effect.
Yeah.
You know, but we're working through that.
Councilmember Cummings.
Just a broad philosophical point that I think I see a lot of my peers as soon as they have a family move into Brunswick, because there's not family housing in Troy. And so I think there is a lot of value in the single family if it goes that way in terms of building our the kind of housing that's available to residents in Troy. But I also, you know, if you're talking about larger scale apartments, some folks might, you know, I know you went down the condo path before, and that's a hard thing.
And it was tough, and that changed. That was why Oakwood Avenue is apartments.
Yeah, but you know, I think that's a thing that we as a council are going to have to keep working towards as we make these decisions and as we plan for the future. Is how we make sure that we are creating the housing stock
But
that
I'm going to tell you
welcomes those families.
that, and I don't mean this, and I hope it doesn't come across as arrogant, but my ear is a lot closer to the residential needs of Troy and what people are looking for and what they want. And downtown Troy has been phenomenal the last 10 years. So the renaissance down there, as they refer to it, has been incredible. Started by apartments, which is exactly the same thing that this could do to North Troy. I'm born and raised in North Troy, Corliss Park, over the hill. I've been in North Troy for 56 years next Friday. This is the stuff that starting to see. I was going through the property that's coming up for tax auction. You know, the staples of my youth. Charlie's Hot Dog is going to come up for taxes. But there's vacancies down through that little business district that when I was a kid was quite a district. You know, and now we got Price Choppers empty. We got a lot of stuff up there that something's got to break. And this, I'm telling you, is the beginning. This stirs on more investment in North Troy. I know it because I've had conversations with people. This is private money coming in that has the potential to change. It has to change it. There's no way to 240 apartments up there with younger people. That's who take the apartments. And they start spending in Troy. You can't tell me Verdiles, Testos. I'm building 2 across the street from Testos right now. 2 City X properties.
Yeah.
All right. And we're working on that. Testo, he brings us over food at lunchtime. He's so happy that we're fixing the property up. You know, and there are people that are business people in Troy that I deal with. I've dealt with them all my life that are looking for some shot to start something up in North Troy so the North Troy can reap the benefits of what South Troy has already got.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Is that anybody? I'm sorry.
That's good. Thank you. While Kevin's up here, other questions?
Thank you.
Good, thanks. Okay, all right, well, if the council members don't have other questions, I know there's some members of the public here. Does anyone from the public want to speak? Yes?
All right.
Is it Keith?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. By all means. My name is Keith Hirokawa. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Do you mind if I speak for here so I can put my notebook down, or does it matter?
Your address?
My address is 100 Records Lane, Extension, Winenskill. As you know, I live down the street. I spend a lot of time in Troy. I'm a professor of law and associate dean of research and scholarship at the law school. And I'm here, on my own behalf, pro se, just to see how things are going and talk through the process. Secret is sort of an area of my expertise. I've published 100 articles on it, a couple books on related environmental issues. So I sort of speak from that background and knowledge. A couple things I wanted to point out that were a little bit complicated and troubling for me. We have hardworking staff for your folks, but the picture you got of secret tonight, a lot of it is flat out wrong as a matter of law. And I wanted to make sure I pointed this stuff out because the last thing we want, we've joked in the past in this room about, making this legal class for some of my students, and that's kind of funny, but I'm not sure we really need to do that. So there are a couple things I wanted to point out. We heard tonight, and I think that was corrected, but I want to emphasize this correction, that the public's comments in the secret process are not irrelevant. The fact that the public is commenting, everybody who has witness to any facts, if they see trees and some such things like that, they testify as experts as to what they see. Right? So they're giving you information about the history of the woods here, about their experiences, and these are facts that are relevant to secret for so many reasons. One of them is the character of the community, and that absolutely is relevant under secret, and there's not an expert in the world who can do a better job of telling you about the character of this community than the folks that live there. You are going to hear, I think, some testimony about the petition, and I'm not sure I agree with your analysis of the way you're fashioning their burden. The petition itself, I just read it for the first time myself, but it says, "We, the undersigned, are the owners of," and then the addresses are listed, and it's up to the tax assessor to determine whether those are adjacent properties and whether they're, for local governments that do this, they let the assessor who's got their information on the parcels to determine whether 20% of those owners have signed or not. The petition on its face has been attested. There's nothing more to do. And although, everything can be refined, but my sense about that is that the way that's sort of on its face it is right to me. The thing I really wanted to talk to you about tonight, though, was the question of who's making the decision here. This is the troubling part of CEQA. You're the lead agency. It's your determination to make. And maybe I just missed stuff because it's not in the public record, although it's supposed to be. But what we heard tonight is, and I don't mean to be pointing, I'm just trying to make reference to the comments, but public comments aren't relevant. We heard there are no geology issues, and not for nothing, but that's factually very troubling for me to understand. The fact that we're bringing in these huge loads right down in this riparian area that has these exposed geological structures to it, we need to know, not just guess, right? The reason for secret is we have to stop guessing. So we need to know. We want a geologist, we want a hydrogeologist taking a look at this. And I believe some of the neighbors have already put in testimony that is expert testimony on these geological structures. So, again, I don't know if it's, what's that?
I didn't hear that.
Oh, I'm sorry, maybe I'm wrong about that.
We certainly have had some testimony about.
No, I didn't.
We shouldn't have back and forth. Let's let Keith,
Oh, yeah.
on time, let's keep it about 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah. There's the list of things that you were told are not significant impacts. And again, it's your decision, right? And this all sort of leads to something that we've talked about before. But what I heard was no impacts on bats, none on geology, none on surface water, none on wildlife, none on schools and fire, none on traffic. So the big, really important discussion here is whether staff's giving you information or whether staff's making the decision for you. One of the reasons this is a little troubling for me is, as I understand, you had an application. You decided you're going to be lead agency. Your next step is to make a threshold determination, which should have been done. But instead, there's this process of information gathering, and I'm a big fan of information gathering. But the process that you're going through right now is essentially an EIS. The difference between what's happening here and an EIS is the extent to which you talked about alternatives. There's a flat out alternatives requirement. So you can look at different ways that different configurations would have different impacts on the environment. There's a scoping process, which we're kind of doing here. Although my understanding of the scoping process is that Mr. Strickland told you all these things that aren't going to be significant impacts, instead of looking at again, this is just what we heard. There will be no impacts to geology. That was just flat out the testimony we heard. Now, what I'm concerned about is who's making the decision. And I'm really concerned about it because, again, I know that there's a lot of experience at the table over here, but part of the testimony you heard tonight was one person who's never seen an EIS where there are going to be archaeological impacts. I have. And the fact that the testimony suggested that because somebody's never seen an EIS for archaeology, that there shouldn't be one here, is not something you should take seriously. It doesn't take a lot of research to see how many EISs have been done just for archaeology alone. So real quick, I know I am limited on time, but a couple things. Looking at the benefits of this project is a super good idea, right? Because of course that's constantly the process we're in. But that's not the seeker process, or at least let me rephrase that. Looking at the benefits is relevant to SECRA, but not as offsets to the negative impacts. Okay, the negative impacts have to be looked at, hard look with focus. The fact that there's benefits is great, but they don't offset, right? So we don't say we're going to kill all the wildlife, but we're going to have a boat ramp, so don't worry about it, right? We have to look at the wildlife, and we can also consider the boat ramp. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, and I think this is pretty important too. The applicant has not submitted applications for all the things they're going to need and has submitted for some, and there's some waiting. It sounds like that's the justification for not doing the threshold determination here. They're not the same thing as seeker. And I think we just heard a good example of why that's the case. If we put traffic impacts from 240 units compared to, and by the way, not this, because that's not how you do seeker. You're going to do 240 units compared to what's there now, which is not this, right? We look at the baseline, what's the environment look like today, and then we do our impacts analysis based on what the changes will be. This is a different kind of thing when you compare it to. I mean, that's a great zoning analysis, single family versus apartments. You can do that for zoning, but that's not secret. But regardless, we heard tonight that a negative threshold determination is justified if something could be mitigated. That's flat out wrong as a matter of law. If you want to do a mitigated negative declaration, right? So in other words, there will not be significant environmental impacts, then that has to be accompanied by what those mitigation measures are. Not the possibility that they could be mitigated maybe if you make them at some point in the future, right? A negative threshold determination is on its face, there are no adverse environmental impacts, right? Not because it could be mitigated. And the reason that was really troubling is what we heard tonight was, well, there'll be more cars on the road, but if we could mitigate it, we'd do a negative threshold determination because a street light could go in. That's only one impact from traffic. I'm sorry, Ms. Steele, I'll wrap up real quick. Yeah, but if you want to
3 seconds.
Okay, 3 seconds. Traffic impacts include all of the extra pollutants on the roadway, all the extra roads, all the extra runway, the safety issues relative to pedestrians, relative to other cars. Just having more cars on the road is more emissions and climate change, which, as I assume you know, is part of the secret process right now. So it's not just the traffic light. It's all the things that come with that action that go into our secret process. So I really do appreciate taking the time to listen.
Thank you, Keith. And I do want to comment on one thing that you mentioned, which was about, city officials providing information versus being decision makers. Tonight, what I saw, which was actually refreshing, was that, Aaron had a comment about public comment not guiding our process, that we should be listening to the developer and third party. And then Rick actually said, well, actually, you can listen to public comment as long as it's fact-based. I think you said everything must be fact-based.
Yeah,
So
I didn't know how
that's-
to work that one.
It's and that's just, there's a slight, not even a conflict, but just, a clarification that's good for us. So I think I appreciate that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, I disagree with much of what Mr. Hirakawa said, except for the fact that public comment is certainly relevant to your determination as long as they're talking about their facts, the facts that they have an expertise or an understanding of.
Right.
Okay?
Perfect. Yep.
Yes.
I think Adam wants to speak.
Thank you, Adam Schultz, on behalf of the applicant. Okay. I'll try not to insult anybody. So the conversation, I'm not sure why the conversation just went the way it did, but yeah, sure, the council is the decision maker. Everybody knows that. You have professional staff. They are advising you to the best of their ability. The seeker process there is not a single through line in any seeker process. The idea of the seeker process, it's right in the statute, is to make sure that environmental considerations are brought into the process and considered at the earliest possible time as the council, in this case, goes through the process of trying to make a determination as to whether or not to approve the zone change. I'm not going to get into a back and forth with Mr. Hirakawa in regard to what seeker requires and what it doesn't, but a statement that mitigation is irrelevant to the initial determination is the Court of Appeals, the highest court in the state of New York, disagrees with Mr. Hirakawa. You don't need to take it from me, take it from the Court of Appeals. And the idea of mitigation is central to seeker. It's actually the intent of seeker. The idea is, let's have a discussion. There is a proposal. It doesn't mean that there can't be a discussion of, hey, what if you tweak this? What if you tweak that? From the applicant's perspective, we would like nothing more than to have a project that everybody, including the opposition, would support. That would be wonderful. No, we're not that naive. We know that there are times when that's just not possible. It's unfortunate. But I will tell you, as a representative of the applicant, we are certainly happy to sit down and have discussions in regard to reasonable alternatives and reasonable changes to the project, if you will. That does not mean, if the people who want to sit at the table with us, they need to identify what would be acceptable, because if their position is that the only thing that's acceptable is that nothing happened at the property, there's no point in having that discussion, because I'm not going to waste my client's time, I'm not going to waste the council's time, staff's time, etc. So we're open to a discussion. We would encourage a discussion. It was interesting to hear some of the comments tonight. Well, have you thought about maybe going to 2 buildings or just different configurations? That can all be done within the seeker process, and it can all be done prior to the board making a determination, the initial determination as to whether to neg deck or pos deck this project. That's all perfectly allowable and should be encouraged. I'm not going to go further because we'll just end up in a back and forth. We don't need to do that tonight. I hope that the presentation provided some information. Oh, the last thing I'll leave you with, I handed a note to the Corporation Council earlier. The only thing that note says is that there's something called the Seeker Handbook, and it's available online. And there's a very nice summary at the beginning of that document that talks about the seeker process. It talks about timelines. It answers some of the questions. Hey, what's a part 1? What's a part 2? What's a part 3? It's a handy reference if anybody would like to take a look at it.
I think we have that.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. And by the way, I do want to mention, I appreciate that it's been very respectful back and forth. So. Leo?
Thank you.
Hello?
Hello. Now you can hear me.
Yes.
Good evening. Thank you so much for everybody, and thank you to the council for allowing us to speak tonight. I really, really appreciate that.
Make sure you state your name and.
Oh, yes, Leo Bachinger, Bachinger. My address is 32 Covell Avenue in Round Lake, New York. I'm a co-organizer. I hear comments from the public that irritate me while speaking. They make me nervous. I was irritated by a public comment about what I'm saying. That irritate me in speaking.
There's comments coming from the back of the room.
Yeah, there's comments. I'm hearing in the background comments that irritating me in speaking. So I'm.
Take your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, if we could keep it quiet in the gallery.
Let me get some place to put this down.
I stopped the clock and.
Thank you.
Have some extra time.
Thank you. I really appreciate the hint to the reference to the handbook in Seeker, and I completely concur. I also want to recommend the DOS services for governmental services for municipal support and services. They are a great resource. They advise, they provide training on this thing, so you don't have to take it from us or any other public comments, as there is a lot of controversy or questions or disagreement. They can provide more recommendations on that too. I wanted to say a couple of things and wanted to just don't take up too much of your time. I just wanted to point out that in the record there is an ecological survey that is not from us. We tried to, we submitted it, but we didn't try it. We try to base what we say as much as possible in facts. We are not experts on most of the things, so we try to refer to experts to provide evidence. And I would just ask you to consider that as factual evidence as well, as it's coming from experts, right? We had that on the stormwater runoff analysis. We had that on the ecosystem survey and many, many other things. And I think that really should be considered in your determination of significance. I also heard that the archaeology is not extraordinary, where the applicant's submission, this archaeological report itself states, if I remember correctly, that it's national register eligible. It also mentions its uniqueness for it being untouched, relatively undisturbed. And in fact, it was heavily studied and published on, and we submitted those studies to the record as well. That really emphasize how important the site is. I also want to emphasize that it requires one potential significant impact for a positive declaration. And we submitted a coalition letter that brings up 5 of those potentially significant impacts that are not taken from thin air, but are based on studies and reports that we submitted and that were authored together with experts or by experts. And that, in my opinion, were not really fully addressed at all to a level where you overcome the significance of that impact. And many of those statements in the record explicitly speak to the significance of that impact as well. I think we heard something about traffic. I just want to reiterate that traffic studies often or primarily look at the experience of the driver. It does not include impact on the people living there, right? Their health, their safety on the street. But that's a really important impact to look at. And Seeker, just to clarify that the environmental review environment in Seeker is a really broad conceived term. Yes, that includes trees, that includes birds, the water, but it also includes things like character of the neighborhood or archaeology or public safety and health or ecosystem services and their loss, especially in climate change as we see now. We have a heat wave right now. All those impacts need to be looked at, and we try to bring as much to the record to show that those impacts are significant. And one of those impacts, actually, the applicant kind of like say it is really significant, and that is the impact on the neighborhood character, right? It changes it, it makes it younger, the people are more dense, it's gonna be like downtown Troy. That's a significant change in character of neighborhood, and in that needs a positive declaration, in my opinion. I'm out of breath, guys. That's what happens if I don't prepare my statement and quickly scribble it together. Thank you, thank you. So thank you for bearing with me. I also want to point out that we didn't talk about yet about the tax parcel in Scattercook. That is part of this review, together with the development, and what the impacts are there. Another question is, what if the applicant doesn't receive the permits for what he has proposed for the tax parcel in Scattercook? Where does the stormwater go? What does that mean? What are the impacts here? What happens then? And in a similar manner, I think it's really important to consistently make explicit that both of those tax parcels are subject to the seeker, right? There was one really important thing that I wanted to say, and then I'm done, I promise. You have the letter with the 5 significant impacts in the record. The DEC itself told you about imperiled mussels on the site and told you that that requires a mussel survey if they're impacted by, say, construction. We don't know what this construction looks like for the boat dock, but I would assume that it has some impact on the sediment there, which is also a Superfund site. Certainly the boat traffic and their increase will have a significant impact. I can't imagine how not to, and we hope we can bring you more factual evidence around that as well, in addition to what you already have on record by the DEC in a letter. And that is the letter from June. So I really don't want to underemphasize, like it's really important, I really want to emphasize that you have a record not only from us, but from the DEC, from other agencies, from experts that already tell you of significant impacts that we didn't hear addressed or pushed back against really so far. I think with that I want to end. And the EJ, the environmental, the DEC CP29, I think that was already clarified, but that applies here. We call the DEC, and they told us the provisions apply if a state permit as an SPDES, if that's required, then it applies. I hope that's all. I have one last request, 10 seconds.
Okay, 10 seconds.
Thank you. As we couldn't prepare and as I've made a lot of statements without evidence and facts, I would request the record for this meeting to stay open for 7 days so we can submit the references.
I mean, the record though.
We're always receiving, just to address that, Leo, we're always receiving input from anyone in the community regarding this. And it always, Mara keeps it and it goes into the record, so. This isn't a formal council meeting where it's like entered.
I mean, if you're requesting that things be added to the minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
I can do that within 7 days if you want.
If it's more feasible
It's up to
to.
you guys to.
I have no problem. It's a workshop. If you want to enter more information into the workshop, there's no issue with that.
We're waiting on this presentation as well.
Yeah.
For the-
Yeah, the
Yep, that's also
presentation will be
information.
added.
Brian will be sending us the presentation. That's additional information as well.
I mean, I'm happy to add
Sure.
letters to the end of the minutes, and if you want to set a timeline on when those can be submitted.
Yeah, well, we'd appreciate, first of all, Brian receiving the presentation as soon as possible, but we'll set a 7-day deadline on that. I think that's fine. That's reasonable.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody, also the staff and the applicant. It was really a civil conversation that I really appreciate.
Yeah, I also appreciate that as well. Leo, I have a question for you as a representative of the Friends, right? You're considered to be a representative, right?
I'm one of the co-organizers, yes.
So we just heard Mr. Schultz talk about how he, or as a representative of the developer, is willing to come to the table and talk through these issues. He also said, if it's either, oh, nothing happens on that site, if that's your position, then there's not a lot more that, there's not much more they can do to address issues if it's basically don't build anything. So is it I just want to understand this clearly. We'll just state this on the record. Is it your position that nothing should happen on that site and that you're not willing to, you don't want to have a conversation to have, if there's like some scaled down proposal?
We always welcome conversations and discussions about what the future of this land can be. I don't think a hearing about seeker is necessarily the place for that or in front of the city council. We are happy to work with the city council and the developer on those kind of questions. I don't think it's relevant for the question of determining impacts of the action that is in front of you in consideration.
I agree with you.
But in general, we are always happy and open for conversations and welcome being reached out to on that. Anytime, with beyond that, what we could imagine, that's a community decision, a decision between more, I can't make the decision, but really it should not be material to the decision of the determination of significance.
I agree with you, Leo, that it's not part of this process, about the secret process. It's just because Mr. Schultz brought it up, and I thought it was a really good point he made. I wanted to see, where you stand on that. And if certainly you can think through that. And I prefer to have people come together at the table and work through differences rather than I don't want the city council to be kind of like a proxy for some battle between, Kevin Vandenberg and the Friends of the Mohegan Talk. So this is my thought process. And
We'd like
telling
the
you.
council to the same thing.
Say that again, Kevin?
We open that up to the council too, for more discussion.
Absolutely. Good. I'm happy with the tone. I really am.
Love to talk more.
But you can reach out to us. Our email is on www.save1011.org, where you also can donate to our organization.
All right, thank you, Leo. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
I can't do that on behalf of an organization that's
Sure.
community organized, but we are always happy to set something up if the applicant
Thank
wants to
you.
reach out to us.
Thank you.
If I could just point out that on their petition that they filed,
Just grab the mic. Yeah.
on the petition that they filed with the city of Troy, it says nothing. No, they don't want anything built on the land. It clearly states on the top of the petition that they want nothing. But I'd love to talk to them.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll have plenty of time to continue the conversation. Like I said, I'd like to end it on a high note, which was I feel like we've made a little bit of progress tonight. So are there any other questions or, yes, yeah, absolutely.
I would like to comment, but no question.
Okay, the microphone, please. It's Jess, right?
I don't know where.
Yeah, please state your name and address, of course.
Hi, my name is Jessica Bennett. I live at 1009 Second Avenue, which is immediately adjacent to the parcel at hand. And I'm the person who walked around and got all the signatures. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. I can certify that every single person I spoke with, I cross-referenced with the tax records and is the owner of the property. And just so you have the wording of the petition, give me 1 second. We, the owners of the property directly adjacent to the project site, Second Avenue project proposed for 1011 Second Avenue, register this signature to this petition, our opposition to the proposed project, to any development of the site, and importantly, to a change in zoning code from R1 to P plan development. So that's what they saw when they signed this. I know there was some questions, so if
Do you know what percentage of the adjacent property owners said?
I think there were 26. I would say at least 50% without doing the actual counting right now. So we looked at the map, we cross-referenced it with the code of what constitutes an adjacent parcel owner, because it doesn't mean exactly just that you touch it. Across the street is also accepted as well. And then I spoke to and got a signature from every single one of them except 3. 2 were long-term out of town and 1 is terminally ill and I wasn't going to bother him. But so I don't know the exact math percentage, but everybody but 3. So to answer that.
Thanks.
Sure. So how did they base their decision to sign on it? Who gave them their interpretation of the information on that project? Was it open, or did they have all the facts they needed to make a good decision to sign that petition, or was it just the message that you were sharing with them?
Well, certainly they all read it. That statement.
What did they read?
The statement I just read to you. So, I mean, everybody takes their time. This was not the first conversation I had with every single one of them. They're all aware. A number of them have signed on to the Zoom meetings when they were online and very accessible. A number have come and spoke as well, and that's in the record, of course. And yeah, and I would say with confidence, all of them know the scope of the plans. They've all looked. I direct them to the city website. This is where you can find it. This is where the project narrative is available. Take a look at it. So I would say with confidence that, I'm not saying there's going to be I'm not trying to oversell the scope of the project. They know what they're signing, and I hope that their signature, is taken as evidence of that.
It'd be hard to oversell.
Well, Chair, I would just say that one of the residents on that road approached me and had a conversation with me in a very direct negative way when we first started, telling me the story about that property. It took about 20 minutes of conversation to give him an interpretation of how I look at that property, how I look at that project in that area. And when he walked away, he said, "Oh, I didn't know that," at least 3 times in our conversation. So I'm just saying that through this person that lives right across the street that I talked to, he felt that there was more information he didn't have at that time. Now, I will tell you honestly, he's still questioning about the project because he doesn't know what it will look like. He says he doesn't want a big concrete building in front of his house. And I told him that's not the way it works. And I do plan to show him pictures, and show him some information that I have on what this will look like and what the impact is for the city and the city residents, and also Lansing. So I just want to say that came up. That's why I asked you, because he approached me with a whole different scenario that I wasn't prepared for and hadn't heard before. So I just wanted to make that clear on the record.
Thank you. This is all really interesting to hear your experience as well, and I can't speak
There's
to
only one person, so it's not experience, it's just one experience.
Sure.
I don't want to inflate it, because people tend to inflate things.
I can't speak to what he said or didn't say, but I will totally agree with you. There is a lot of misinformation out there about the project amongst the residents. And so in speaking with them and keeping them up to date the best that I can, I try to use the most public resources available to point them to. I think we can all agree that the scope of this project isn't up for interpretation. What we're really talking about right here, petition aside, but really also ties into the character of the community and the importance of the public speaking up, particularly the ones that are most affected by this project. The character of the community, as you all know, is it's quiet. It's quiet. That's what brought people up there in the first place. And I find it very sad that in so many, there are a number of houses that they're older, they've retired, their kids have grown up, and they have flat out said to me, including one directly across the street from the project, if this goes in, I'm going to move. And I don't think that is what we should be striving. We shouldn't be complicit in that kind of thinking and feeling not represented for residents who have been taxpayers, let's be all honest, most importantly, the taxpayers, and they're the fabric of our community. They chose to raise their kids here, and now something's coming in where they're feeling not represented, and there isn't yet a plan for them to have their needs heard, other than to come to these council meetings, which I really appreciate the opportunity for public comment, but not everybody works on the same schedule. And 6 or 7 o'clock at night when you have kids, you all know the constraints that everyday people face here in Troy. It's not always possible for them to come and speak, which is why a CP29 plan and also the public scoping process that's inherent in the seeker process is so important, because I guarantee you the people affected by this will come out and they do want to talk to you and they want their voices to be heard. And that's something I hear over and over and over again when I speak to people. So I hope that's something we can move forward on. I do just want to echo what some of the other speakers have said. We covered a lot of ground here, and that's great. But let's pan back and take a look at what we're talking about is a determination of significance. Positive declaration, negative declaration. That's what's before you. Like we're not stamping approved site plan yet. We're going A or B. And in order for a positive declaration, there just has to be one potential environmental impact. That's it. And we've certainly spoken to a number of potential environmental impacts already. I do just want to speak for a moment to the comment about the bats. Bats in New York State and across the Northeast are imperiled by something called white nose syndrome. And so they've become a very protective species. And in my kind of excitement to learn what flora and fauna are in my yard, I've done a little bit of bat detecting. And I am not an expert by any stretch, but it's really very interesting. All bats speak on a different frequency. If you're this type of bat, you think of it like a radio dial. You speak up here. If you're this type of bat, you speak down here. What I found, and certainly I hope that there would be a study that would be able to look at this more in depth by experts, is that there were at least 2 endangered species bats that I got some frequency on. And so as the immediate parcel owner, not even somewhere, a neighborhood away, that got me very excited. One, that we could be hosting and helping in the environment this particular species, but also that the presence of it would constitute another potential environmental impact. And that's not going to shut the project down. The choice is, do we need more studies? And a POSDEC just says, yes, let's take a closer look. And so as we're kind of debating here and you guys get to make this important decision, I hope you'll just pan back and say, yeah, you know what, we do need more information. And then we can go the POSDEC route. Because to shut it down without that, we're really selling ourselves short as a city and the potential that we have in this site. So.
Thank you, Jess. We're I think about over 7 minutes now.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Dermott, yes.
I think we spoke about this before. Your property, you have a driveway there. And it butts up towards on Kevin's property.
I actually have a survey, and that actually is still my property, if I'm reading the survey correctly, which I'm not a professional surveyor. But it butts up against it, yeah.
And it's on the right side of your driveway?
Yep.
And then is there cleared land?
Yes, yeah, like a little yard.
And who owns that cleared land?
I don't.
Cleared it.
The previous owners. I maintain it.
Kevin can't hear the conversation, but Councilperson McDermott's asking about the land, the cleared land that's adjacent to Jess's driveway.
Okay, so you
And who cleared it?
No, I've
Jess
only
did
lived
not
there
clear
2
it.
years.
maintain it, and you, why aren't you letting it grow again to be forest?
Do you have to share?
Well, I can be both pro-forest and enjoy a little bit of yard. So what I've actually been doing, to your point, is slowly working on pulling out the invasive species. And so there are a number of things that I've done to strengthen the actual cohesion and health of the forest by taking out invasive species. Islanthus, for instance, is really the one I'm speaking to. And I've also spent a significant amount of money with More Trees Arborist Co-op, which is another Troy arbor service here. There have been several mature trees that have fallen over on that side yard, and I've spent about $1,600 so far making sure those are taken away so they're not a hazard to people walking, because one kind of was over closer to fallen slightly on the road or curb, and then also just to So we don't have a suspended mature tree falling. I don't want to be like I heard.
That's a pretty significant piece.
It was a big tree.
No,
Oh.
the property that you're clearing.
Oh,
That you're-
I'm not
that you're
clearing
maintaining-
it.
That you're maintaining. Is there a fire pit or something on that?
There is a garbage can that the previous owners left, and it has holes poked in it for, I think probably for fire.
Okay, thank you.
Chair. Councilperson Bell?
How long have you lived there?
In October, it'll be 2 years.
So 2 years.
And I love it, honestly. I really love it up there.
I can imagine it's pretty quiet, having that, you might have some concerns having somebody next door to you. I can understand that.
It's actually not as quiet as you'd think. The road is pretty busy. And there's no sidewalk, which would be a great asset to the area. But if the developer can put one in, he's not inventing new land. The city can also put one in as well. I do my best to keep in front of mine, like close and weed whack, because I've seen so many near misses. It's terrifying sometimes to watch.
So, I mean, you've heard people talk tonight, we've always stated this is, and I think the term is, there's an as of right use, which means that the property owner can put something on their property. So I'm just asking you as an environmentalist, and I could be wrong, I might have misread the numbers, but I think when I seen the single family housing in there, that would actually destroy more of the forestry than the apartment units. So you'd be maximizing the destruction of the trees and plants and pieces in that area if the developer were to go to single family homes, which he has a right to develop something there, right? He does, right? Just like anybody else that owns a piece of property. It's not gonna be here for a while, unless you can raise up a few $1 million. So my question is, wouldn't this be counterproductive to your focus by saying, hey, this is gonna, if we do this, it's gonna wipe out all the forestry and all the environmental value in that property by doing that, and the resource of the road will be cut off from everybody, except for the property owners that have the yards. I'm just hearing something, but it seems like that process, that's why I think that the attorney for the developer made a great offer for you and the others who oppose this project to sit down and say, hey, if these are truly your beliefs, they should be working towards your beliefs and not really look at structure, but look at value. And I would hope that you and the gentleman over there both would take time to sit down and meet the developer and his team and say, hey, we know we can't have a forest, but we want to watch what we do have, and we'd like to work with you and put something of value there. I think that Councilman Zaluski emphasized that point earlier, and I emphasize it again. I would like to see the opposition party with the developer party to sit down and just kind of, have a conversation. That's nothing. Have a conversation. If it doesn't go anywhere, you can walk away and say you tried. If you don't, you're never going to know what to become of it. And I think that you're hurting your own value by pushing the housing into the project. So I just want to bring that up.
I appreciate that contrast, but that honestly sounds like a scare tactic. And what we're doing is deciding on the environmental review. We're not looking at the merit of a 36 single family housing unit. That is subject to a site plan review. And I would guess that there would be a number of houses that would be knocked off of this. So to your point of how much forest are we saving, it's not an either or. We're not saying if you don't give us this apartment complex, we're going to do this. And so I guess we better advocate for the apartment complex.
I'm not saying, what I'm trying to say is with your core values, wouldn't it be better to collaborate and say, how do we work together on the project? And while we're getting hit with it, I want to make sure we get some questions. It's not a formal committee meeting, but okay, we'll answer. I'm just trying to say that I hear one thing, but I see another being fast. Why don't we just sit down and talk and see what you guys get together and see what we go, because we're going to do our part on the secret.
I hope so, because in the seeker is a scoping process that requires the community participate. We're part of the community. I am all for communication. But there is a process for that, and that includes the public participation plan as well as the 90-day public scoping process in seeker. So we absolutely will sit down. I can guarantee that. We will absolutely sit down and bring all of our concerns to the table. But I want to make sure it's done above board and in line with seeker, because we're all invested in doing this the right way. We're all invested in making sure we are in line with New York State processes, because that leaves us open otherwise. And I'm rooting for you guys, but I'm rooting for all of us, really.
Absolutely. We're all in it together. Thank you.
Councilperson Steele.
Thank you. I just want to say, I really resent the insinuation that we are not going to be doing our job. And it's been repeated several times tonight, and it is very insulting. We have been designated the lead agency. We are elected by the people of Troy. We understand the importance of seeker, and for you to say to us, we hope you do this. We are going to do this, and we are going to follow the letter of the law. And I really, really resent the implication that we are not fulfilling our duties. You're entitled to your opinion, but please do not imply that we are not going to do our job, okay? And you have made it very clear in your intentions that you do not want development on this land, and that's okay, that's your opinion. But there has to be a process that followed, and we are going to follow it. And whether you like it or not, the outcome, I'm sorry. We may not like it ourselves, but we are going to follow the letter of the law. And I think I speak for my fellow people on that. And the implication that we would in some way delegate that authority is really insulting.
I apologize, Councilmember
It's
Steele.
not you.
It's not.
It's your comment.
Understood.
Respond. You don't have to. If you look like you want to say something, you're not.
No, I want to assure all of you that there is absolutely no disrespect meant, and in our goal as friends of Mohegan-Tuck, and then also as a private citizen neighbor, in rooting for you, that's the truth of it. I want you to do the best job that you can, and my concern personally with, and I hope this wasn't misconstrued, I haven't once said you guys aren't doing a good job. We're so early on. There's not really been a job done yet. Is the secret clock with the determination of significance with 20 days after the 30-day period for lead agency.
That's not true.
Yeah, that's not accurate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, why don't we let Rick, because that is a question that I've heard.
Well, that was yeah, I've
So
heard
let's
it.
have that.
In fact, I was going to make a comment, but I will only have.
Yeah, Rick, can you respond to that, please? Yeah.
Can she?
I'd like to know for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be this notion that once the council declared itself lead agency, it had 20 days to make its decision on whether or not this should be positive declaration or negative declaration. The regulations do not say that. The regulations say, and the secret handbook also says, that you have 20 days from when you have sufficient information to make it. You decide whether the information you have is sufficient. And when you decide that you have enough information, then you have 20 days to make your decision, your determination.
And Rick, just to follow up on that.
Sure.
When we say so there's 7 of us, well, 6 tonight, but 7 normally. We all have to agree when we have enough information, or is it one council member says, hey, we have enough now?
I would say it has to be a majority.
Majority.
Okay. I mean, pretty much the way you would make the determination itself by a majority. I mean, you're constituted as a secret board right now, let's say.
Thank you for that clarification. Yes.
Chair.
Councilmember Ashman first.
I'd just like to say that we asked for a workshop. We asked to have this meeting put together so we could gather information from the developers, from you guys up here giving us the information. This is what we needed to get. We've heard from the opposition at many Zoom meetings and whatnot over and over. And we're listening, we're hearing. So we're requesting to have a workshop so we can get more information, so we can make more of a determination. As Councilmember Steele said, I was insulted tonight by the insinuation that we don't know what we're doing, we're not experienced enough and so forth. That's wrong. We're calling these meetings so we can understand what's going on. We've been elected by the people, we are working for the people, and this is our job by pulling more information in so we can make a better determination for all involved. That's it, thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't drop.
Mic drop.
Meeting adjourned.
Well, I actually had one follow-up question to what Jess was talking about. So first of all, that's incredible effort you did with the petitions. Our corporation counsel said that the petitions need to be perfected. Is that correct? I forget if that's how you phrased that.
Yeah, the petitions indicate on the face of the petition that the signatories are opposed to the proposed zoning change.
Yes.
The statute requires that a percentage, it's actually 20%,
Right.
it has three different categories. One category would be 20% of the people who are directly affected, but in this case, there's only one owner, let's say Kevin Vandenberg, so that doesn't qualify. Another one is 20% of the adjacent owners. Well, New York State owns the Riverside, and then probably Mr. Vandenberg will end up owning the northern parcel, which is a separate parcel. He may be adjacent, but in any case, that may or may not apply. The third one, which has the most likelihood of applying, is 20% of, not 20% of the owners, owners of 20% of the land opposite to the designated area, which is the subject of the zoning change. So in other words, and 100 feet deep. So as you can see, it gets a little arcane, and the petition doesn't specify any of that. It doesn't tell me on its face how much land the signatories own in one of those categories.
So you're talking about tax maps you need to.
Well, tax maps or something. I mean, it's not up to me. I don't think it's up to the city to decide that that does encompass 20% of the owners. I think they have to provide me something to verify the petition in some way so that it meets one of the statutory categories.
Understood.
All right. And there's very little guidance in the statute itself, and there's very little case law on it. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
I'm just wondering if they've been notified of that.
Well, no, that's actually, I think I said early on, I hadn't done the notification yet, but I am going to do a notification since the petition was accepted by the clerk, but it wasn't, it doesn't really tell me enough information. So I have no objection as counsel for the city for them supplementing the petition or doing what they can do to make it sufficient. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And it sounds like they might be able to if she got as many signatures,
Okay, are there any other questions, comments from anyone in this room?
Chair,
Yes.
I'd just like to thank everyone who was here. The opposition, I'd like to thank you all as well, because you're giving a lot of information to us that we need to process as well. So thank you for coming, and I appreciate it all. Thank you to Rick. What's your name again? Steve and Aaron. Thank you. And thank you, because this is what we needed, and I'm looking forward to the other workshops coming forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Ashman first, and I was actually going to thank everyone, but she already did, so ditto. We all thank you, everyone, for being here. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion. Second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No. In honor of Bob Doherty.
We are formally adjourned. Thank you.
So, I think for school district, this is probably an involved agency or an interested agency. Or not. Really?
I don't really know.
And then should we be putting up their studies as well on this website?
Yes. Yeah. The studies and